Remember the meat scandal when it was suggested that DNA testing be done on all red meat entering the country, the wrong meat in the wrong kind of meat. South Africa doesn't have sufficient specialised staff for the funding for this, apparently. Now, Amanda Rogaly saw the gap and launched FoodSure. That's an independent food verification and marketing endorsement company. She joins us now, as well as Bochoko Nchabele from the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. So I mentioned Amanda first, but let me start with you, Bochoko, just to get up the context here. Remind us of the issues here. There was this scandal about the wrong meat being in another kind of meat. And a water buffalo, I think, was one of the kinds of meat that was found in something else. What is the state of play with your regulation and the legislation with food content?
Look, I think what we've done now is that we've improved our regulatory regimes. For instance, in terms of import control, we have already put in our import conditions that there is declaration upfront in terms of imported meat as to what is the final destination. And the idea here is that we identify and try anticipate what will be the final use of the product, so that we are able to track where it has gone, knowing where it came from, and then we ensure that inspectors are able to go and verify actually where the meat ended up.
Perhaps, Amanda, also responding to this very crisis that Bochoko and David are talking about, we saw Shoremark coming up and being one of the stamps of approvals that consumer goods should have to make sure that they don't have buffalo inside chicken, or whatever the case may be. But let's talk about Shoremark. What's the promise of Shoremark? If you've got the stamp, what does that mean in terms of what you're about to eat?
Well, basically, at the end of the day, FoodSure, we are there to restore the trust between the producer and the consumer. There's been the meat scandal. There were so many other scandals previously. So really the mark is there to guarantee the consumer that what they think they're eating really is what they're eating. We're there to help the producer verify their claims to the consumer.
And what's been the uptake so far? I understand that you have some companies on board, but has it been voluntary, or are you on a crusading campaign of sorts to get companies on board?
Well, it's interestingly, our marketing strategy first rolled out. We were going to go out and actually activate and inform consumers about who we are and what we were doing, and later down the line then go to the producers. But producers have gotten wind of us and they've come knocking on our door because naturally they see the competitive advantage of this. So things have taken off a lot quicker than we anticipated, which has been fantastic. And once again, it just works in the favour of the consumer and in the producer at the same time.
Now, there is another body which is supposed to assure quality. It's been around for a long time, and that's the South African Bureau of Standards, SABS. That's still there. Are you in opposition to them, Amanda? Are you saying that they aren't reliable? What?
Not at all. We're not in opposition to them. In fact, I think that we, in turn, actually are making their jobs a little bit easier. We are really out there, not to name and shame companies, but we are out there to go and actually applaud and market those wonderful, honest, verified companies to the consumer. So our roles are slightly different, but at the end of the day, we're doing the same thing. We're looking after the consumer.
Are there cost implications for products that have the Shoremark on them? Does it mean that because it's gone through this rigorous testing, you're probably paying a little bit more than the same product that hasn't gone through that testing?
What our model allows is that everyone, the companies that come on board with us, is they are, yes, naturally there's costs involved, but there's no costing for the actual testing. There's costing involved to actually bear the stamp. So an annual license fee is paid to bear the actual stamp. And a lot of companies have said, well, they're not going to take this money out of their marketing budgets. They're actually going to take it out of their corporate social responsibility budgets because they're seeing it as a responsibility to the consumer at the end of the day.
Well, Kocho, how's our capacity? We often hear of very good policies from government. We hear of good approaches, good plans to do things, but the inspectorate perhaps isn't what it should be. And in fact, things don't happen because you don't have the capacity.
Look, I think it's a mixed bag. You must remember that South Africa remains one of the big countries in the world that export. You must remember that we export a huge quantity of fruits, wines, etc., etc. So there's a bit of a gap in terms of local control. We agreed to that. And one of the things that we're considering doing is to strengthen inspections, particularly with regards to local government. What we're looking at is to see if we can have cross-training of inspectors so that inspectors that arrive at any one place are able to do as many inspections as possible. Because currently you have inspections that come from agriculture, inspectors that come from local government, and those that come from health and the NRCS, which is the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications. So our whole approach is to ensure that you have one inspector who's able to do a variety of inspections, and that way we improve our ability to assure the consumer that the product that they have on their table is exactly as described. Plus, you would recall that most recently, after this matter came about, the DTI also came up with a new set of regulations that are now enforceable by the National Regulator for Compulsory Specification. So we're in process to try and improve the regime that we use. We've also worked very hard to improve coordination between the three departments that are responsible for food safety in South Africa.
It sounds as if from a regulatory front, a lot of work has been made and lots of progress has been made. But how are we faring in terms of actually enforcing penalties where compliance hasn't been met?
Look, it differs according to legislation. So you would find that in some instances, instead of a penalty, somebody forfeits the consignment. In some instances, there is a fine that is payable, but the truth is that most of the fines could actually do a lot in terms of being re-looked at and ensure that the penalty is much more severe so that it prevents a repeat offense.
I want to ask this question to both of you, but Amanda first. One reads about our citrus and the exports to Europe, and apparently there's this black spot that gets on. It's a color that gets on. It doesn't affect the quality of the orange or the lemon or whatever at all, but they don't like it in Europe, and the black spot is going to cause us to be blacklisted. Can you get involved with that sort of thing? Can you actually influence markets?
Unfortunately, at that stage, we can't in terms of international markets. Locally, it would be our job to go to the public and say, this product is absolutely perfect. Obviously, the appearance puts people off the product, but at the end of the day, the product is perfect, and we have the power to influence the local market.
Look, I think the debate is quite bigger than we could handle in this short discussion. Essentially, what Europe says is that there's a risk of CBS establishing itself in their countries, particularly in the Mediterranean region. What we have is overwhelming evidence that in the past 100 years that South Africa has been exporting to Europe, there has never been one incidence of CBS. So evidence suggests that it is improbable. We have scientific evidence of research that's been conducted both here and in the United States that backs that statement. So it's really something that's more a trade restrictive measure, in our opinion, by the European Union.
Okay. Well, interesting subject. We'll have to revisit it. Thanks to Amanda Rogaly, who is MD of FoodSure, and Bokacho Nchabele, who is Director of Food Safety and Quality Assurance at the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries.